The Business of Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Land Trust. Did you know sportsmen spend over $5 billion annually in hunter and angler access fees? Land Trust is a platform that connects sportsmen with farmers and ranchers like you who have untapped profits just by providing access to their land. Go to landtrust.com/BOA, as in Business of Agriculture, to see how much you might add to your bottom line.
Greetings and welcome to the Business of Agriculture podcast with me, your host, Damian Mason, but you already knew that. Got a great topic for you today, and it's got some real meat to it based on what's going on. We're talking about climate. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about the weather. We've got a great guest. His name is Eric Snodgrass, 13-year professor at University of Illinois, and now some sort of crazy big title, principal atmospheric scientist, climatological researcher, some damn thing like that with Nutrien. Eric, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think they gave me that title to make me feel important, even though all I really do is just the weather.
It's almost one of those, Eric, that you've got to then put it on both the front and the back of the business card. It's that long of a title. Yeah. All right, so real quickly, we're going to talk about all things weather and climate, which are not the same thing, as we all know. It depends on the political debate. Sometimes when it's a hot day in July, the people that are telling you that we all need to have higher taxes say, see how hot it is? It's climate change. You say, I thought weather wasn't climate. You just told us that the other day when it was cold. Anyway, so you're a weather guy, and you're going to cover all these things real quickly. Give me the background on you. I said professor turned in corporate. You're working for Nutrien now. What are you doing?
Sure. So, like I said, I was a professor at University of Illinois for a long time, and along the way started a couple small companies. What inspired me to get into ag was the drought of 2012. That was a big one for me, living here in Illinois. Nutrien scooped up both of my companies in 2018, said, hey, you want to come over and be kind of the face of what we do for a while and do a lot of forward-facing stuff with clients and employees. I said, you know what, sounds like a good idea. And I've had a ball ever since then.
Your actual degrees, obviously you're a PhD, you are a meteorology. What's the degree in?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I am one of these all but defended PhDs. I sold my PhD. So here I was. Yeah. So what happened was I was working away on finished the master's, and they immediately asked me to start teaching. And so I got into this director position teaching. So I had all my coursework done. I was working on my dissertation. I'm like, you know what? This dissertation topic, I was doing seasonal forecasting. I found an insurance company that wanted to buy that model off of us. So I sold it, went to go start the new PhD topic. And I'm like, I'm getting into this whole entrepreneurial starting companies thing. And I just ran with it. And it turned out the university was extremely supportive of that because I was landing students internships. I was bringing in research dollars, and we were just flying. And so along the way, you know, things just kept going in that direction. And so, yeah, I've got it all done, but I sold it. And therefore you can't publish it as a PhD thesis anymore.
Got it. So I like it. He's the weatherman turned entrepreneur, and I think that's fantastic. So I promised, we're going to talk all things weather, and I think it's really important for our listeners and viewers. We're going to cover not only all climate topics, but what it means for ag, what changes we're going to see, what regulations we may see, what policies we will see implemented or pushed or proposed, and what it's going to do to our industry. So that's what we're covering here in this episode of the Business of Agriculture podcast with my special guest, Eric Snodgrass. I want to remind you, dear listener, that you can also view the Business of Ag podcast. Go to the Damian Mason channel on YouTube. Go to YouTube, just type in Damian Mason channel. Please subscribe while you're there. It'll help me get more viewers and more people can see and hear this great stuff. Also, I always encourage you to share these podcasts with your non-ag people, because we do a really good job of informing, and my guests do a really good job of informing non-ag people about what's going on in our industry. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that I've got an awesome sponsor, the one you heard about in the recording before this episode. That's Land Trust. But I have another sponsor that's been with me for over a year, and that is Harvest Profit. Harvest Profit is a software solution for your agricultural enterprise. You've got dollars in, dollars out, different farms, all these different capital expenditures, all this capital assets you've got to manage. What's your software doing to help you manage all of these ins and outs and assets and all this stuff? You need a financial software that helps your business be profitable. Go to harvestprofit.com and check out what products they have. You can even get a free 14-day trial. All right. More than any other industry, our business is affected by what happens outside the window, the weather. Is the climate changing, Eric Snodgrass?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been observing here across the country for more than a century what is happening systematically with our weather systems. And we look at those data, kind of average them out on a 30-year time scale, and we look for shifts, and we can see these shifts and define them. And what's great about that is that the information we get from that can go directly into the hands of the farmer to help them make decisions on how longer term change could affect things. So absolutely. And when we look through all the data and comb through it and study it, some of the signals that pop out are quite clear that these changes are stuff we need to be thinking about every day in order to continue to be profitable in this industry.
We say we've been keeping good records for about maybe 130 years. Does that sound right? Like late 1800s?
Yeah. So the most reliable records we have from some weather stations, and a lot of these were put in by military, go back to about 1893. Before that, data collection was very sparse, of course, across the country. But since then, we've been able to kind of reconstruct historical records. And, nowadays we have over 15,000 weather stations across the country that are monitored by the government. Plus, we have 160 radars and the best satellite network on the face of the earth, keeping track of our weather. And we've honestly had that in place since the 80s. So we got 40 years of super high tech in our observations, plus go back another 90, and you've got some fantastic data there to analyze.
Okay, so let's go back just 100 years ago when things really started changing, when ag got really good. We hybridized corn, we started using tractors instead of draft mules. Things got really good. So back there 100 to 120 years ago, I'm told we're about 1 degree Fahrenheit warmer on average than we were then, and we're a bit wetter. Yeah. Explain, please.
It depends on which side of the mountains you're on. So the degree warmer, we're about 1.5 degrees warmer during that time.
A degree and a half Fahrenheit, not 1.5 degrees centigrade.
Right. Okay. So when you think about what that means, think about it in context like this. So I'm looking out here. I live in Champaign, Illinois, and we are flat as could be. I mean, this is the flattest place on the earth, in my opinion. Our local mountain chains are called overpasses, right? In our part of the world. So one of the reasons why the landscape looks like this, there's many reasons, but we had a lot of glacier activity back here about 20,000 years ago. Okay. Where I was sitting, we had a several 100-foot thick chunk of ice 20,000 years ago. To put that number 1.5 degrees in context, globally, the temperature was about 4 degrees colder than it is today. So Earth's temperature is very sensitive inside of a very small range. Now we're talking about an average temperature for the whole planet. So when we see this increase of 1.5 degrees, historically, that's been the quickest rise in temperature that we've observed, looking back through Earth's geological past. And so we asked the question you just asked, well, what in the world does this mean, and where is it going? And I mentioned to you that we need to split the country a bit because the rate of change of temperature is much greater in the West than it is here in the East. And that's a really cool factor that happens when you start to study how the atmosphere flows, okay? So in a nutshell, this is what we are observing. One of the canaries in the coal mine, if you will, for change is the North Pacific. It has taken in an enormous amount of heat, and the warmer that it becomes, the more the jet stream just wants to run over the top of it. If it runs over the top of that and goes up into Alaska, British Columbia, and over the West, they get the heat. But because of the typical wavelength of a jet stream trough ridge pattern, it dips over the Great Lakes. So here we are on this side of the mountains. You said we're getting wetter? Absolutely. In the primary corn and soybean belt, over the last 70 years, we have increased April to October precipitation by 5.5 inches.
April to October, here where you and I live, Midwest.
Yep.
5.5 inches more rain in that April to October time.
Than back in the 40s and 50s. Yep. That's the longer term trend. That's straight out of NOAA's data sets.
Okay, and here's the question. Isn't that good for crop production?
Well, certainly in the near term, it's been fantastic. We've increased rainfall and also increased the length of our growing season. I mean, you and I, we get to travel the country and speak to growers. And I remember I was in South Dakota this is a couple of years ago, about 600 in the audience. And I got the great question about this. And I said, well, just how many of you are multi-generational farmers? And I had them raise their hands. And I said, all right, when did grandpa want to plant corn? And they're like, after June 1st, that's all we could do. Right. Yeah. When did dad plant corn? He had to be in by May 15th. And when do you want to plant corn? Yeah, if April I can 1st. Plant it April 15th, I'm in, And I said, well, the thing about these changes we've seen, what does that 1.5 degrees afford you? Well, it's primarily coming in overnight low temperatures. And if the warming's happening in overnight low temperatures, you're putting your last frost date further and further back in the year.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're opening things up a little earlier. Now, the last 2 years, 2020, the frost in the eastern part of the Corn Belt, where at Fort Wayne, Indiana, hit 18 degrees Fahrenheit last May. What was that, May 9th or 10th? Those things still happen. That's weather. That's the annual variability. But we look at that longer term shift. We bought about 10 days right here in our two states of growing.
So that's what I was going to say is that, and I do, because I do lean a little to the right. And I have had these people that say we need more laws, we need more regulation, climate change. And I said, well, do you even know the difference? Because when it was a hot summer in 1988, it was the beginning of this whole thing about global warming. But then also the summer of 1992, I don't think I wore a swimsuit in the summer of 1992. So, there's that thing. And by the way, you talk about the frost at night. We had frost here in Northeast Indiana on, it was May 17, 18, I believe, 15. Yeah, May 15, I think. In that time frame, we had overnight frost, which is about maybe 10 days later than our normal frost-free date.
Yeah, and that can happen year to year. And so what we do is when we think about climate, the smallest denominator over which you can average the weather is 30 years. So we look at these long-term shifts. And so it's kind of like bouncing all over the place every year. But if the whole wave packet is going this way or this way, that's what we want to study. And, you're right. The politics side of it is going to give you so many different flavors of all of this. And sometimes they just step back and say, I don't even care. The data nerd inside of me says, if this is what's happening, I got to put this in the hands of the grower so that if there's a longer term shift in the decision that needs to be made, let's go after it.
Okay, so we think we're about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than we were, say, turn of the century. And I'm talking 1890s to 1900s. And we're getting 5 inches more rain than we did 70 years ago, because you're going back to the 40s when we had pretty good science. It's World War II era, et cetera. Warmer equals better for food production. Wetter, frankly, if you're in, we have the issue here where we put in drainage ditches and tile because we have plenty of moisture. But it's always that thing of we've got more water than we need in March, April, May, generally, and then we've got not enough of it in July and August, typical kind of thing. So I don't see this being bad for ag, but there probably is a downside. And I'm thinking bugs. Is it true that this 1.5 degrees difference, does it mean that we're going to have worse bugs because we'll have as cold of winters? Is there anything to that?
There is some stuff to that. And what we worry about in terms of bugs and even let's go to add vegetation to that is that, the shifts allow for an expansion of a suitable habitat for certain invasive species and certain bugs that can get farther to north or, survive a winter without, an extremely deep freeze. So there's certainly concern about that. And I'll tell you, in the United States, that concern is, I would say, minimalized over what you see in other growing areas. So for example, in China, India, Africa, and even especially down in Australia, those shifts, they're more susceptible to these issues in the first place. So now the migration of some of these insects, and we've got it in some good peer-reviewed publications, are starting to just be something that you now have to do more management of, where in the past it wasn't an issue to manage. But yeah, you mentioned the good, and I'll be honest with you, if you just said, Snodgrass, take a step back and objectively give me an answer, has the change up to this point been good? Well, you all know that yield trend for corn, soybeans, growing right here, most of that trend's technology, but weather is helping that out in a big way. The question we ask ourselves is, does it just keep going for the next century in that direction?
Right.
And that's where we start to run into some concern. So I'll say this, and that would be, most of our additional heat we have here is in those overnight lows.
Yeah.
when we start to run the risk of having a lot of July and August overnight lows that can't get below 70, well, we know what that does to a corn crop. It doesn't allow the corn to stop respiration at night. It doesn't allow for resting, and we could start to be in trouble. But that could be where we would risk that in Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana. That could still be 15, 20, 30 more years into the future before we start to bump into that every night. And we have to ask, are we going to shift? Are we going to start planting at that point in early April such that we avoid it? And those are the questions. And what do we do in agriculture? We continually adapt and strategize,
right,
and mitigate risk. And so we look for those sources of solutions against these things. But the background state is changing, and you've defined it there with those numbers.
I'll give you some other numbers. You talked about South Dakota. My friends think that I'm more famous than Jerry Seinfeld in the Dakotas. I work there all the time. And you know what? Those South Dakotans and North Dakotans, for even more so, used to be like they had two things, snow and some wheat. And, if there is truth to this whole thing that we're getting a better growing season because we're hanging around with lesser, nights, all of a sudden, this farm ground up there, I was like, you got no business planting corn and soybeans up here in North Dakota, for God's sakes. I said, let us do that down in the Corn Belt and keep my cash rent high because you don't need to be making this kind of money up here. So it's probably been positive for them. But, that's also hybridization and genetically engineered crops and a whole bunch of technology. I don't think the 1.5 degrees is the reason all of a sudden that we're growing soybeans in North Dakota.
It helps.
It helps.
It helps. And you think about those acreage increases. What is it? I think since 1990, they've added, 7 million acres of corn and soybeans in North Dakota. And they're growing it in Canada as well, where they used to grow wheat, barley, canola, and legumes.
Yeah, and I don't like the Canadians. I'm just going to put it out here that I think them damn Canadians should just leave the corn and the soybeans. You know what? Stick with snow and oats. All right, Canada. All right. I got to pick on. I love the Canadians. And what's bad is you and I haven't been able to go there for the last 15 months, right?
I know. Last time I was there, I was in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon back in 2019. And then since then haven't returned. But I love the Canadians. Just don't forget Nutrients based out of Calgary. So
I had to pick on them, and I did know that about your company, and I've worked there a bunch. What's interesting is when someone said, okay, you're not traveling much with all this whole pandemic stuff going on. I said, yeah. And they said, do you miss it? And I said, I do, because it keeps me fresh. And you and I both like getting in front of live audiences. You talk about the weather. I talk about ag issues in a funny way. And then I said, well, you'll be back at it. And I said, that's the thing. How many more years do I want to? I said, let me tell you about my last trip to Alberta. It was, of course, wintertime, because you only ever go to these Canadian provinces in the winter, right, Eric? They only have us there for speed. It's like, why don't you have an ag conference in July? I've never seen Alberta in July, okay? I've only seen it November to February.
Yeah.
I of course, one of those deals where to get between two speaking engagements, I'm like up all night traveling. So it's like midnight and I'm driving on the highway in Alberta, I don't know, somewhere between Red Deer and, Edmonton or something. And I come over a rise. It's snow and ice. Black ice, as the people like to call it. Anyway, it's ice on asphalt, snow, some wind, and then a semi-trailer in front of me is jackknife. So I've had no sleep. It's midnight. It's dark, ice, snow, wind, and a semi-trailer. After I come over a rise and I'm like, oh my God. So I start putting it down in low, because a smart person never hit the brakes, right? Don't ever hit the brakes on ice. I'm gearing down into low, foot's off the gas. And then I'm like, holy shit. A deer is also in the highway. I'm like, what's next? Lightning? Is lightning coming next? So yes. As you said, we love Canada. It's not an easy place to love sometimes, though, is it?
No, they can have some of the craziest weather up there. And you're right about those conditions, just perilous at times.
Yeah. And then another time, of course, I actually took a picture for social media. I'm like, I don't think most people have been out where it was negative 30. I think it was ambient temperature was negative 30, and you're plugging your car in. All right. So this is Eric Snodgrass. Great topic about climate. We're going to be talking more about some of the practical implications and what that means. But I want to remind you here at the midway point that this episode of the Business of Agriculture is brought to you by my good friends at Harvest Profit. Harvest Profit's a company that was founded by Nick Horeb. Nick, not even a software engineer, just a smart entrepreneurial guy that said, you know what, ag enterprises need a software solution that works as hard as they do to be profitable. So he invented software products for agriculture specifically. You could go to harvestprofit.com, read of some of Nick's articles, and see if they have a product that'll work for you. I'm sure they will. A bunch of my listeners and viewers have become customers, and they're very happy, and you will be too. All right, Eric Snodgrass, Joe Biden. I know that we're not going to get political. You're not going to get political. It's okay if I do. Joe Biden was speaking to the Coast Guard Academy last week. And in between forgetting what he was saying and reading his teleprompter, he did say that we have 35 named storms last year, more hurricanes than we've ever had before. I don't know if that's true because I don't really count hurricanes, on an annual basis. And they claimed that that's because of climate change. Is this true, A, number one? And two, if so, is there some way we can make hurricanes go away?
I love the second question. I used to, when I was teaching at the U of I always got some of the greatest ideas from some of my students because, ultimately the hurricane is going to feed off of warm ocean. It's just this, in scientific terms, it's a large Carnot cycle. So if anybody's listening that studies some physics, they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So the more heat we pump into them, the bigger and badder they become. Okay, so some solutions. I love these. I've heard multiple times, let's just nuke the suckers and blow them up. Like, no. You drop a nuclear weapon in there, it's going to eat it for lunch, and it's going to spread the nuclear fallout all over the place. Because a typical hurricane in a day, get this number ready, in a day, a typical hurricane releases more energy than 600,000 Fat Man bombs. Remember that from 1945? Okay. So secondly, they said,
we're not in any way being derogatory to people that are weight challenged. There were two bombs dropped in Japan. One was called like Skinny Lady and one was called Fat Man.
Fat Man and Little Boy. Fat Man and Little Boy.
Little Boy and Fat Man. And there's the two bombs that we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And certainly we're not making jest of that because a lot of people were killed. But that was the first, we never saw anything like it. In fact, there's argument made that those bombs changed the weather there because of what happened.
Yeah, and a funny side story on that. The bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki, there was a young Japanese scientist who was studying the blast radius. He actually took his research and came over to the University of Chicago in the 1950s and started to equate the blast radius of the nuclear bombs with the same kind of wind damage we were getting from tornadoes, derechos, some squall lines, and downbursts. Studied it through the 70s, ended up doing so much research, he developed a scale by which we rank tornadoes. And this guy I'm talking about is Dr. Ted Fujita. So interestingly enough, the day that the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki, he was supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in the initial city. There was another city that it was going to get dropped in, but that city was not chosen because it was too cloudy and they couldn't get the site lined up. So they chose city number 2, which is Nagasaki, sparing his life. He becomes a U.S. citizen and saves so many of us with tornado research. What a beautiful story here.
A very good story. Yeah. So a hurricane, you're saying, has 600 times the power, 600 times the amount of power as the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima.
Oh, yeah, easily. And that's all in just the production of clouds and wind. So you come back to the statement here. So we had 30 named systems last year. And was that a lot? Absolutely. How much total accumulated energy was in all of them? It didn't surpass some of the big bad years like 2005. Remember, that's when we had Katrina and those other hurricanes. But what fueled last year was the fact we had a La Nina in the Pacific, lowering the wind shear in the Atlantic, and warm ocean temperatures. And anytime that combination comes together, we see a lot of tropical cyclone activity. So the big underlying question is, are we seeing a systematic change in the ocean temperatures with time, meaning that when hurricanes do form, they could be more powerful? And we would say, yeah, in the main development region between Africa and the United States, those ocean temperatures are warming. And what that translates into is when systems do form, they have more energy to extract and therefore do what we don't want them to do, which is to slow down and produce more rain and flooding. A lot of folks do not realize that the greatest threat of a hurricane is the flooding rain. I mean, think back to Harvey hitting Houston.
Yeah, like 60 inches of rain came like in a day.
5 days. Yeah, it was 5 days, 60 inches of rain. Where we live, that's 130% of our annual rainfall.
Yeah, we get about 40 inches of rain here per year, and you're talking about 5 days, you're getting 50% more than that, right?
Exactly. So those are the kind of longer term things. And, speaking to the Coast Guard, I'll just make one comment about it. When we think about this broader topic of climate change, regardless of the political situation, the United States government, through our armed services, has had a plan in place for over 30 years on how they have to be strategic with climate shift issues, simply because if they don't plan and strategize, they don't care why it's changing. It's changing. They've observed it. They have to adjust. And to be honest, that's the same strategy I think a lot of farmers use. Hey, if there's change, I got to know about it, because if I don't adjust, I get left in the dust, and this doesn't work going forward. So yeah, it's a very, very it's a strategic decision to be made on the change and what you do to continue to be profitable. And I think that's the biggest question.
Are there more hurricanes because of a changing climate, though? You didn't answer that.
Sure. So when we look at the longer term research, we go back, we have pretty good records going back to the satellite era. Remember this, before that, all we have is ship reports out in the Atlantic to tell us what's out there.
Right.
So satellite era, call it 1980 to present, we have actually seen in the Atlantic a slight decrease in total number of systems, but the ones that are category 3 and higher are increasing. Okay. So it's interesting, but the change is almost flat, to be honest with you.
So we really aren't having, you don't think we're actually having more hurricanes than we did 100 years ago? We're having a different kind?
They're stronger.
Okay. Yep. Let's talk about ag, since this obviously is all that's what we're here for, is talk about the business of agriculture. Are we to blame? We tend to be a target now. We're in the crosshairs. I think we're also used as a political lever. We are used as a straw man or a really convenient lever. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez believes that her followers want her to be anti-cheeseburgers, then she'll say that cows are killing us. Are we to blame?
The largest answer, the biggest answer to that is no. And let me tell you the reasons why I would say no, we are not to blame. Okay, so agricultural productivity is the livelihood of the planet. Mm-hmm. We have to grow the food, the fiber, and the fuel we need to thrive as a species on this planet. So it's out of necessity we do what we do. Is it intensive? Oh, absolutely. Do we change the land? Of course we do. That's how you grow food at the scale we grow and feed at the scale we grow. But the net effect is we're growing something. And as a consequence, the net effect of producing biomass is to extract carbon from the atmosphere.
Right.
Now, but we also, remember, through the production of fertilizer and the use of it, through the fact we have to drive a tractor through the field to make this all happen. Sure, we consume and therefore produce carbon dioxide. And that is why there's so many companies and strategies out there to minimize that and to monetize that. But to say there's blame, to be honest, I'll step back and just say the blame needs to be widely shared among all industries and all people. And you're right. We sometimes, I feel this very much, are unfairly targeted. And I think it may come back to the fact that we may not take the time and effort to provide the correct narrative to combat the misinformation. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge for a very long time. It's who's loudest, right? And how many farmers do you know go out there and just start shouting about things? We don't.
Right. Okay. Environmentally, I'd say that we're doing better for the world than we ever have. We're using less natural resources per calorie of food produced than has ever happened. We used to have a 1,800-pound draft horse, out here to produce a few bushels of corn per acre. Look what we're doing now with our equipment. So from an environmental standpoint, I'd say we're doing well. If it's about carbon, we could probably do better by using cover crops, because then you've got all that acreage that's now absorbing CO2 out of the atmosphere. Am I right?
Sure. Yeah. The longer you keep something growing there, that's the net effect.
Okay. So what else do you think we will be doing in agriculture from an environmental standpoint, either because it's just smart for us to do or because we're going to be forced to do so?
Yeah, I think the first response is the most important, because what are we looking for? We're looking at ways to become more efficient, to get more out of what we do. That ends up driving the technology, that drives the innovation. And I think that's what's going to ultimately start to just peel back on the total emissions that we have. So we're all about, the industry is about reduction of emissions naturally. I mean, just anyways, because by doing so, we save money. Now, that's aside from the fact that there is this emerging carbon credit market that's also going to be there as well.
Is it going to be there? I believe it's going to be there, but right now it's still the Wild West. We've had an episode on this very show about that. There are 2 farmers that have so far, two out of the 3.3 million in the country, 2 that have actually gotten a payment for carbon sequestration. What's your prediction on that?
I would just look at some of the very large companies, Nutrien as an example, that have made substantial investments in developing what that looks like for the grower, so that there is resiliency, there's emerging market, and so that we can be a part of the solution for these issues. You also have other extremely large companies that have made similar designations. And we have companies like Indigo Ag and other companies that are out there to create this. I think will ultimately be determined its future success by the consumer. What I mean by that is you will find that a lot of people shop for a story. They go buy something off the shelf that says, this thing did not have a massive impact on the environment. I will pay the premium for that. And you better believe Walmart puts it right at 5'7" eye level in the grocery store as well. So those things all work together, these natural market forces and these natural efficiency forces to provide a solution. And we in agriculture want to be the voice explaining that we automatically have to do the things that make us efficient, low emitting, because if we do, we are resilient, we take better care of our soil and more profitable. That's what top producers do.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. So, and I think some of the stuff we're going to do anyhow. Again, if you talk about cover crops, I believe we're going to. I've said it. I put it in my ag book. I talked about soil as a wannabe agronomist. That we're going to look back at all the leaving our soil bare for 7 months of the year. And it's going to be like, boy, they used to use leeches for medical treatment. Also, I mean, that's how barbaric I think we're going to be, or backward we're going to look at that. So cover crops then are not only protecting our soil, but also absorbing the CO2 if we're supposed to be decarbonizing the world. But then there's the issue of methane, which has 30 times longer staying power than CO2 or something I've read. And boy, my goodness, has it become very popular to beat the hell out of bovine. If you're a politician and you lean a certain direction politically, you want to get your people wound up, tell them that these big factory farms have these cattle in them, feeding them cattle grain. That's what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called it, cattle grain. I'm not sure if that's traded on the CME or not, cattle grain. And it's because of cows. So are livestock farms really causing us that much problem, Eric?
I think of it like this. I have a close friend that's a bit overweight. And he told me last year that the way he's going to lose weight is to stop eating bread. But on his desk, he's got a jar about this big, chock full of M&Ms. What he's missing here is the fact that if he wanted to lose weight, it's a calorie thing. He's missing the main point, is my opinion. So we come back to this question you pose about cattle. So do cattle produce methane? You better believe it. When they chew up whatever they eat, they burp it back up, and that's just a part of that's digestion in the cow. That's what it. Okay.
Yep.
So we look at this big picture methane, and we say how much of the methane emission is coming from, cows, and when you look at it, it's a very, very little tiny sliver of the total pie, and I look at it in the same way I look at my friend who's given up the bread but still eating the M&Ms.
So you're saying that we're targeting it's the old thing about the person that goes through the buffet and puts 8,000 calories of food on their plate and then drinks a Diet Coke.
You got it.
The cows do emit methane, but in the scope of things, it's targeting something that's really not, it's further minuscule.
I wouldn't say minuscule, but it is not the major producer of methane. There are, the sources in industry, so many other things are methane emitters. And you're right, it's an extremely efficient greenhouse gas in terms of heat retention. So we have to keep an eye out on that, just like we do carbon dioxide. But the net effect is, I would like to just say this. The consumption of protein has been critical to the health of humans on our planet.
Right.
And to all of a sudden to target that and say stop by just looking for something to target, it doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense in the science.
No, so scientifically it makes no sense, but as I pointed out, it's not even about the science. People say it's about the science, it's not about the science, it's generally about the emotion or the seizing of political power or using it for political gain, is my observation.
Sure. And I'm going to look up those numbers and send them to you so I can tell you exactly what that fraction looks like. But again, it's pointing the finger in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
Speaking of pointing the finger in the wrong direction for political gain or power or profit, depending on what it is, Cory Booker's U.S. Senator, I don't need your opinion on him, but he proposed that we should limit farm size, these CAFOs, these awful factory farms that have too many animals on them. So he proposed that we should limit no more than like 999 cows or steers on a feed yard or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell difference does it make if there's 10,000 cows there or 10,000 cows spread out between 10 places? Does it matter?
Yeah, this would be getting a little bit outside my area of expertise, but if anybody, not him, but anybody's going to make a statement like that, my first question would be, can you show me the peer-reviewed literature that says that would be the smartest decision? We should all ask that of everybody. I mean, you brought me on.
You just asked for a career politician to give you peer-reviewed research and logic, which we know never comes out of Washington, D.C. You speak to ag crowds all over North America. What do you tell them? Give me a couple of your big points. But you don't do much. You've been doing it via Zoom call, but yeah. What are a couple of your points, Mr. Snodgrass?
In this vein of climate and change, the point I hammer home all the time is it's this simple, if you ask me. If we do everything possible to maintain extremely healthy soil, we are more resilient to the changes. Mm-hmm. I just gave a talk the other day in California. I mean, in California, I'm talking to a group of people that are in the middle of a state with 40 million people, leads to the production of over 40 different fruits and vegetables and milk, and has extremely strict policy, water restrictions, and the rate of change of their climate far exceeds what we're experiencing on this side of the mountains. And I tell that to them.
So they're getting hotter faster or drier?
Way faster and yeah. I mean, I know this is foreign to you and I being from right here, but in California, you want to dig a well and hit water, you're going to go down between 800 and 2,000 feet. Their reservoirs, Lake Shasta, Lake Oroville, just checked on them yesterday. They're sitting at about 40% of full pool. And the resources that demand that water are tremendous. I talked to those farmers, said, what should you do? I say you should maintain soil. They come back and say, absolutely, because the better we take care of the soil, better it takes care of us. That's the message I try to carry everywhere.
I appreciate that message. The thing with California, though, there's a lot of political wrangling where some policies and some different regulations have made that worse. So is it just a matter of hotter and drier, or is it also a matter of misallocation of the water?
No comment. I'll just say that my answer to you is that the climate shift is exacerbating other problems. Mm-hmm. And therefore...
Taking care of the soil, agreed. Cover crops is something I'm a big proponent of. And those are things that we decarbonizing and whatnot. What about the stuff that is being tossed about? What about the stuff that they are throwing around in Washington, D.C.? Limiting farm size is not going to change it. You just said that, or I said that, and you agreed. Give me the peer review study. Taxing meat. All that does is make meats more expensive. What things are being tossed about that actually would be good for the environment? Regulations on how far we can drive, electric cars. What are we talking about here?
Well, my mind first went to the electrification of the transportation system. Okay. Not from a policy perspective, not from a regulation perspective, but purely from a marketplace and consumer demand perspective. Should the electrification of our transportation network increase, what it does is it reduces demand on liquid fuel, right? We still have to have energy to charge those batteries. It just comes from decentralized places. Not decentralized, centralized places.
Yeah, I mean,
yes, yeah.
Now to get my electric car to go, I've got to, because some people think you just magically plug it into the wall and that wall just produces electricity, but it's not the wall that produces electricity. It's not the socket in the wall. It's not the fuse panel in your basement. It is
there's a power company,
a coal or possibly a natural gas fired or maybe even nuclear powered power plant.
Right.
So yeah, and it is centralized, as you say. So electrifying the transportation sector is not only tremendously costly, does it change the weather?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's the last one.
Yeah. So does it change the weather? When we look at the sources of carbon in the atmosphere and therefore the resulting impacts on climate, the majority of it does come from industry and the production of power. It is not necessarily from the driving of large vehicles all over the place spreading carbon dioxide, because most of what comes out of your tailpipe is water vapor. Okay, but what it would do is it would shift around where we are emitting to these centralized places, which means we'd have to increase demand. Will that increase in demand be met with an increase in solar power production or other forms? I don't know. If you ask me personally, because I used to teach a course on environmental sustainability about renewable and alternative energy at the University of Illinois. Yep. And if you ask me personally, I love the fact we're shifting to natural gas, and there's many reasons. One, it burns a whole lot cleaner than coal. Two, we've got it in spades in the United States. Mm-hmm. And the third thing about it is that the transport of it and the use of it it's a much cleaner thing. Now, are there issues around the extraction of it? Oh yeah, I'm not glossing over that. But as the transition happens because we did this before, right? We went from wood to coal, coal to oil, oil to natural gas, and there's going to be a progression forward to new stuff. But I'd make this blanket statement about it. That transition will happen overnight. The moment that one of these things, a cell phone, remains charged for over a week at a time. That means the battery technology finally got to this place that it's there. And then, I mean, have you driven a truck with 1,000 foot-pounds of torque at 0 RPM? I gotta admit, that's kind of fun. So there's going to be attraction to this electric vehicle market with time, I think.
Yeah, there probably will be. Any other things that we didn't cover? Any other weather or climatological issues that Eric Snodgrass wants to share with the listeners of the Business of Agriculture?
Yeah, I'll talk about this year in just a moment, okay? So when I think about this year, we've lately had some halfway decent moisture return to the Corn Belt. It's not everywhere. There are some soil moisture problems kind of along I-80 all the way up into the Dakotas. The longer term risk for this summer, I am not yet ready to tell you that we've dodged a bullet with drought risk, because for the first time in a very long time, actually going back about 9 years, we've got some pretty cold water on the West Coast. And if you just handed me a map of ocean temperatures right now and said, Eric, you have to make a forecast off of this one thing for summer, I'd look at those cold temperatures on the West Coast and say, we have risk for regional drought development in the Midwest. And I want folks to stay aware of that, because that could continue well, we know what markets have been doing lately, which has been volatile, but this is a source of risk in the supply side of things going forward. And I think we all need to keep a close eye on it. No, 2012 is not an analog to 2021, mm-hmm. But is there a risk of drought this upcoming summer? There is. I'm going to keep an eye on it. 2012,
again, weather's not climate, but you've referenced 2012 a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I'm one of these guys, I am a farm guy at heart, and I always make jokes about farmers love the weather. But 1988, I was working in a ceiling tile factory on the evening shift, which means the place would keep up all day. And you go into this place where they had ovens that were cooking ceiling tile at 350 degrees. Plus, it was, no kidding, 94 degrees outside pretty much every day for the summer, and no rain. And I was sleeping during the day in an old unair-conditioned farmhouse where I lived with my parents because I was an 18-year-old boy. I bought my own air conditioner. In fact, I worked overtime, bought my own window air conditioner so I could sleep during the daytime in a 110-degree house otherwise. And then 2012, I'm doing a gig in Michigan. I called home. I said, honey, it's terrible. And she says, I've got fans on the cattle. And I said, what is it in Huntington, Indiana? She says, honestly, I think it is 100 degrees outside. And the good thing is the humidity wasn't 85 or 90% like we sometimes have because there had been no moisture in the whole, for 2 months.
Yeah.
We're not going to see that in 2021. We've been talking about subsoil moisture problems in, like you said, some of what I'd call the plains states. You're thinking that this is because of the cold weather on the west or because of what's causing this potential dryness for pretty much a lot of the United States and Canada?
Yeah. So a lot of it happened at the end of winter. So we didn't get the snowpack coming out of the Canadian prairie into the northern plains. That sent them off into drought. We then had, remember, at the end of last growing season, we had drought during harvest in October, in September and October. And then in the central plains, Nebraska had its driest August on record. So we just didn't fix that through winter. Yeah, it was wet in Nebraska in March this year, but it didn't correct the longer term problem. Mm-hmm. So what happened in 12 and in 88 or 80 and 83? Those are years that just ring true with drought, right? We just saw that by this time in the summer, the jet stream just bumped up north of that 49th parallel and stayed there. Mm-hmm. And we tended to have just ridges dotting from the central Pacific over to the central Atlantic, shoving everything north. And if you want to have a good stormy summer, you got to get the jet stream winds cranking over the top of you. If they're doing that in Canada, we get left out. And what do you end up getting? A pop-up storm that's 3 miles wide, puts down 2.5 inches of rain right over there, and you get nothing here.
You never see it. So are we going back to the answer is that we need to invade Canada? I mean, is that what we're kind of talking about? But we're going to do it in July. We're going to do it in July. Finally, I'm going to go to Alberta in July instead of going there in February.
Boy, it'd be nice. I've been in Canada once in summer, and I'll be honest with you, there is a mosquito issue where I was, but the weather was fantastic. Mm-hmm. I would not go back to that same place in January. Not a chance, because minus 30 is just every day there at times.
I keep saying Alberta. I should also say I've worked in New Brunswick, because my buddy in the potato business might be listening to this. And it was February. It was February, and this is no kidding. Speaking of weather, I told my wife when I got home, I said, in about 5 years, I'd like to not be going in February to these places that I almost get killed. She says, what? And I said, well, it wasn't a deer on this one. This one it was. This one was. It was on a 2-lane highway in New Brunswick, and I pulled over so I could check my phone because I'm traveling for business as you and I do, and I want to be safe. My problem is I pulled into a driveway that was sloping, and I started sliding, and I almost slid into a Canadian guy's house. I was about a foot from his front door with a rental car, putting it forward and reverse, rocking it, which you learned if you grew up in this part of the world. And the guy comes out, I said, dude, I'm not trying to hit your house. I'm trying to get out your driveway. All right. His name's Eric Snodgrass. Great discussion on climate, on weather, on what it's doing to agriculture and what we're doing right in agriculture, what we're going to see in the future. If anybody wants to look you up, how do they find you?
Yeah, you know what? I'll give you out my email address, eric.snodgrass@nutrien.com. Great resource. And I can even get folks that want to contact me and daily weather reports I produce that Nutrien puts out for free, give you that national perspective, keep an eye on the growing season. So just hit me up with an email and we'll get you some info.
And you know what? I cross paths with this guy on the circuit sometimes, and he does a really good job of putting out the weather stuff and climatological big picture stuff. So anyway, his name is Eric Snodgrass, eric.snodgrass@nutrien.com if you want to reach out to him. My name is Damian Mason. This episode is brought to you by Land Trust and by Harvest Profit. Harvest Profit, a software company founded by my buddy Nick Horeb. What you're basically talking about is a software that is geared to agriculture. You've got money to manage. You know what? It's past time. You get past using the seed corn tablet in your glove box. All right. Use my friends at Harvest Profit. Use their product to help you make your agricultural enterprise more profitable. Go to harvestprofit.com and see what they can give you. Free 14-day trial after all. All right. Till next time, Eric, I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's like almost like two old farmers in the coffee shop talking weather, but on a higher level, with anyway, thanks for being here.
Yep, thank you.
Till next time, it's the business of agriculture.
Thank you for tuning into the Business of Agriculture podcast, sponsored by Land Trust. Land Trust partners with farmers and ranchers to capture pure profit from sportsmen seeking new experiences and places to hunt and fish. Land Trust built the platform and does the marketing. You maintain 100% control of access and activities, and you set the rules. There's no cost or obligation when you list, and the next 10 Business of Agriculture listeners who go to landtrust.com/BOA are eligible for a gift worth over $2,000.